Welcome to everybody online and everybody who's here in the room. The Weatherhead East Asian Institute is hosting two professors from Pantheon University in Athens today. And one of them, Kostas Tsimonis, will be making a presentation around the Chinese presence in Greece. Kostas is a senior lecturer in Chinese society at King's College London and at Pantheon University. And he and his colleague, Andreas Gofas, who is here from Pantheon University, are developing a program at that university on China to develop China studies, academic China studies in Greece and in the region around Greece. And so we're very excited to have them here, and we're talking about this program that they're developing. But at the same time, we want to learn from them about the Chinese presence there. And I'm developing a cold, so I have to wear this mask. Otherwise, I would show my face to people. So that's great. Kostas has a deep record on China studies with 2 books and with many articles. So I'm happy to turn it over to him for the presentation. Welcome, Kostas.
Thank you, Andy. Hello.
Oh, I should say, I want to add that those of you online, you can please put your questions and comments in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and later when we get to it, I'll look on that tab and pass on what you have to say. You know what? What was I heard? I guess through this. Okay, great.
Okay, can we switch?
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Professor Nathan, also Professor Nguyen, for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here to speak to an audience in class and also online, and to share with you the story of Greece with Chinese investment in the best way I can within a limited period of time. So this presentation concentrates on the embeddedness perspective of Chinese investment. By this, I refer to the form of integration of an investment in the economic, political, legal, and social structures of the host environment that, as I'm going to argue, shape it more than we often assume, but also create vulnerabilities for recipient countries that are different to those that we usually talk about. There is a policy assumption of a unified strategy by Beijing to weaponize investment for political gain, a form of aggressive takeover of countries by China. Now, this view that is often associated with traditional schools in international relations perhaps is valid, could be valid in certain cases, but I believe it mainly fails to understand the actual risks and craft optimal policy responses to Chinese investment in many other cases. Now, the perspective of embeddedness actually calls for concepts and methodologies, not so much from IR, but from sociology, anthropology, history, and political science to provide the kind of rich empirical data, the thick description, right, that we need in order to understand what is happening on the ground and why. And for those interested, of course, to formulate policy responses accordingly. Now, the research I will base my presentation on started as a slightly different project. It started as a project on Chinese investment and labor relations, but it was exactly this local angle that got me to think more about the complex local global nexus that shapes Chinese FDI and the influence that brings. So today's talk and some key takeaways, I will start with providing some context, of course, because I assume that most people are not very familiar with the Greek context in the case of COSCO's investment in Piraeus. I will explain briefly the differences between the securitization versus the embeddedness perspective. And then I will unpack the agency of local actors, the agency of regional actors, so of all the different actors that shape Chinese investment in Piraeus, and address the question of influence. Now, the key argument I would say is that over-securitization actually shadows other very important aspects of Chinese investment and the impact it has and the influence it has in local societies. So we need to understand the agency of local actors, which is crucial. This whole idea of bad investors and helpless recipient countries, I think it's too simplistic. It does not apply, at least not, I think, in the European context. Now, methodologically, also the analysis of the particularities of cases and the specific agency that takes place is very important to understand influence and to assess the different types of risk involved. Okay, and we'll see that this is what we're seeing in Piraeus is less of a hard security risk, but more of a risk that is social in nature. It has to do with rule of law. It has to do with environmental standards. It has to do with regulation. So, and the problem here is, of course, that the EU instruments and much of the debate and concern on Chinese investment actually doesn't address these areas. It addressed more of the hard kind of security areas. So, why to care about Greece? Apart from being a fantastic destination for holiday and for conferences. So what to care about Greece? Why to care about Chinese influence in Greece? Now, there is geopolitical importance of Greece, and I think of any country actually becomes more visible at times of crisis like this one, right? So we have the Russian invasion in Ukraine, where Greece has actually become a key component of the supply chain that leads to Ukraine. We have the Eastern and another crisis in the Middle East. We have Erdogan's Turkey that is becoming very unstable in its relations with the US and not as a reliable ally as it used to be. So Greece used to have, but continues to have now, an even more greater importance from all the geopolitical angle, from the NATO perspective, from the US perspective. Now, on the European dimension, we have, first of all, the EU is trying to formulate a response to China on many fields, including, of course, investment. We have an EU strategy towards China. We have an investment screening that was created because of China. But Greece is assumed to be often one of the countries that either drag their feet or they outright undermine EU kind of cohesion for a China policy. And unfortunately, there are some cases to substantiate that, where Greece has been undermining a common European stance, even in the EU context. Now, the economic kind of dimension of why we need to care about Greece. Greece is a major investment recipient in shipping and logistics, which is, of course, a crucial industry for the country, but also for the EU. It has the only fully controlled port by COSCO in Europe, okay? Because it has developed actually a neoliberal model of privatizing the entire port rather than subcontracting certain activities within that port. And this is a major investment for China, and it's not a loan. Okay, so there are no really, the loan guarantees that we see elsewhere. Now, there is also political importance to that investment, exactly because it's one of the very few things that there is a consensus across the spectrum, across the political spectrum in Greece, that this is a very important case of investment that we need to support. Now, there is also a normative dimension to why we need to care about Greece. Internationally, Greece is, of course, strongly positioned in Euro-Atlantic international institutions, but also participates in the PRC-led international institutions. So it's part of the 16+1. Now, I think it's down to 12+1, but let's keep referring to it as 16+1. The AIIB was flirting with the idea of joining also other China-led development banks. Now, and domestically, there is the key question on the impact of investment on institutions in a single country, okay, and in a single regulatory context. Now, there are also other reasons about why we need to care about Greece and this particular investment. Broad range of issues that cover, democracy, the rule of law, whether we have enough transparency on what's happening in the port, on how the negotiations with COSCO have been carried out. There are also issues relating to the expansion of PRC control in the Chinese diaspora in Greece. So there's really a big agenda of why we need to care. But last but not least, there is the esoteric dimension, like those of us in the China studies field. And the big question of how do countries with no China knowledge actually respond to so rapidly and deepening kind of context of relations with China? How do you respond when you receive so important investment, so key industries for your country? How do you respond to that? Now, there is a trend in Europe, I believe not so much in the US, but there is a trend in Europe of the development of a PRC-dominated China studies field, which is linked to the PRC's expanding economic presence. And we see that also happening in Greece. And of course, it's an area of concern for us. Now, Piraeus and the Sino-Greek relations. Now, the investment, COSCO's investment in Piraeus is, I think, one of the key two pillars of Sino-Greek relations. The first pillar is culture. There was a lot of cooperation between China and Greece during the 2004 Olympics in Athens and the 2008 Olympics in Athens, and this has created a lot of momentum and language and activities and experience in cultural cooperation. But really, it is the investment of COSCO in Greece that has elevated the importance in the eyes of the PRC government as well. Now, how did this unfold so that we all have like a clear understanding of the development of that? Up to mid-2005, mid-2000s, around 2005, the COSCO's presence in Greece came part of the agenda, came a part of the political debate. In 2009, we have the conclusion of the first Piraeus deal, in which Greece followed the dominant model in shipping and port management, which is essentially to subcontract a certain activity. In that case, to subcontract the container piers. Now, after 2009, so after the conclusion of this deal, what we have is Greece, the economic collapse, and the beginning of a 10-year-long crisis under which Greece had to privatize. It was forced to privatize quite a lot of its infrastructure and its wealth. And that includes the Piraeus Port Authority. And this is where the second deal comes in, where we don't simply talk about a certain activity taking place in the port, but we're talking about the entire Piraeus Port Authority privatization, which resulted in COSCO gradually gaining 67% of the shares of the PPA, and of course having the control, the management control of the port. Now, soon after that, we started seeing, perhaps more evidently, the other side of the Chinese investment, or Chinese influence. We were very close to having a direct flight with Taipei, between Athens and Taipei. That was really revoked at the very last moment, presumably after pressure from the PRC. Greece undermined the EU stance in at least two big occasions. The first was an EU statement on the Hague's South China Sea ruling, and so Greece blocked that. Also, the EU condemnation in the UN on China's human rights, again blocked with Hungary. In 2017, Greece joined AIIB, as many other European countries had already done. In 2019, Greece became part of the 16+1 initiative. Now, with quite a lot of fanfare around that. Now, since 2019, we see a more balanced approach. There was also government change, and we have a more balanced approach. So Greece has thought through the whole 5G issue and has actually followed what other European countries have been doing. But we also see increased soft power efforts by the PRC. Now, the question on influence. The question on influence is key. And when we analyze the influence that comes with this Chinese investment, I think the major problem is not so much understanding what is happening, but really recalibrating the way we talk about it. There is quite a lot of noise created by overly securitized narratives. These kind of simplistic ideas that Chinese money equals control. There is considerable exaggeration of security threats. So, for instance, very credible European think tanks were suggesting that the port of Piraeus can suddenly become a base for the PLA Navy. It's like a crazy scenario. We also have various statements to that direction. And at the same time, of course, when you speak about security and China is becoming an existential threat to Europe, or look what they're doing to Greece, they're colonizing Greece and things like that, this overshadows and underplays very real threats that we have, and they relate to the rule of law, environmental, social impacts of investments, and the resilience of the regulatory framework, of the ability of the national state to actually regulate and impose the law. Now, so we need, in order to overcome this and to really be able to assess the question of influence, we have to, first of all, analyze every nuance to avoid over or underplaying threats. Okay? And a way to do that is by approaching Chinese investments as embedded within the temporal, spatial, political, social, and legal bounds of the host environment. So by unpacking the agency of the people involved, of the actors involved, we can make a more fair assessment of the impact of Chinese investment in the host country. So we can ask what is happening in Chinese investment sites, what is really Chinese about it. Actually, very often things that take place with Chinese investment have more to do with, I don't know, neoliberal restructuring programs rather than with the agenda of the Chinese company, and assess the various spillover effects that those investments have in other fields. So trying to unpack agency and try to do that in a way that can communicate and we can discuss. COSCO's 2009 entry, so the first deal actually came, it was driven by operational needs. A previous deal that they had in Naples collapsed, failed, they had to pull out. Apparently there was quite a lot of mafia involvement there. And so they saw Piraeus as a good opportunity, and even more so the 2016 deal, because the 2016 deal was essentially offered to them by the circumstances, right? Now, also the neoliberal transformation of shipping and logistics as an industry actually creates quite a lot of opportunities for Chinese state capital. Okay? We tend to think of these two as quite different. No, the liberal transformation actually privileges the ability of states to mobilize their own capital and put it in certain pots. Now, so let's turn to the different actors involved in how they have enabled or how they have been ambiguous towards this investment, and how they have actually managed, even successfully, to resist the many externalities that came with it. I think that the first key group that we need to understand, that we need to assess, are Greek ship owners. The ship owning elite in Greece is tremendously influential. Greece is a very small country of just 10 million, but actually it controls for many decades now international shipping. And that comes from a few ship owning families with strong, very strong financial and political means. So Greek ship owners are traditionally viewed as the people who actually brought COSCO in Greece, so the brokers of COSCO. Reasons why to do that? What was the rationale? So Greek ship owners have the largest commercial fleet in the world, but in terms of gross tonnage, actually China overtook them in 2023. That's what you get when you help your partner get stronger. But Greeks are still number one when it comes to deadweight tonnage, which measures the total weight a ship can carry. So in terms of carrying, they are still the first. Now, Greek owners have spent more than $60 billion ordering ships and building ships in Chinese yards, very often with Chinese loans. So they have like a 10 to 15% of their loan portfolio comes from Chinese banks, and that has gone to constructing vessels much cheaper than other places, Japan, Korea, in China. Now, and usually, especially back in the 2000s, when the first deal was concluded, they were getting those beautiful deals in which they were receiving Chinese loans, very competitive prices for building vessels. And these would also come with 2 or 3 year contracts for chartering those ships to COSCO. Okay, so by doing that, they managed to create a very close partnership, of course, with COSCO, and not only in Greece, not only in Piraeus, but globally. Now, they have actually built more than 1,500 vessels, okay, since 2000. Not surprisingly, they had a very direct role, and this is not something, it's not a rumor. There has been research about that. It has been proven that they had a very direct role in creating the first deal. Okay, the first deal with COSCO. There are stories of certain ship owners calling the prime minister and say, "Listen, we need to do that." But still, we shouldn't really be treating them as a homogeneous group. They have different interests. Some are more close to COSCO, some less. However, they have acted in crucial points of China's arrival in Greece. They have acted as its powerful kind of agents. Now, the political parties are always interesting, and they have very contradicting kind of behavior. That's definitely the case. For political parties within Greece, COSCO symbolizes one thing: efficiency to reform. Okay, because Greece is an extreme, for various reasons, very difficult country to reform, very difficult country to privatize successfully. But for all parties across the political spectrum, Piraeus is something that they want to be associated with when they are in government. Because when they are in opposition, most of them say completely different things. So we know that with the first deal in 2009, there were strong links between the conservative government, ship owners, and COSCO, and they secured the speedy conclusion of that first deal. And during that time, you had the socialists protesting, okay, to attract the votes of the local communities or whoever they wanted to appeal to. When the socialists then came into government, they became immediately the best friends of COSCO. Okay? And that time it was the left that was protesting. No. And when the left came in government, they were actually the party that privatized the entire port. And they gave it to COSCO. So this is, of course, this has to do very much with the domestic politics of the financial crisis as well at that time. But also, so here in the photo, we have the leftist prime minister who was protesting against, what they were calling the Sinicization of the port and all these things, and then, of course, opening his arms to the PLA Navy when actually the PLA Navy visited the port. Now, what we also see, and that was quite shocking also for me to realize, is that there is quite a lot of pro-COSCO personnel in all political parties, in very important positions. So the chief of staff of the Socialist Party used to be, the former chief of staff of the Socialist Party and the Socialist government used to be actually a lawyer for COSCO. The chief of staff of the left party was actually a lawyer for COSCO. Okay, I'm not saying that there is any kind of conspiracy here, but it shows that in the realm of the political and economic elite, certain individuals that have actually vested interest with the investment in Piraeus have traditionally been quite influential across the political spectrum. Now, the European Union. Oh, that's my favorite one because, of course, it's extremely ambiguous and full of contradictions. Mm-hmm. Now, we could call it a European schizophrenia because what we get in the EU is, on the one hand, very alarmist political messages from certain parties, especially the Green Party and the EU Parliament, raising again and again all the different issues with Chinese investment. But then the institutions of the EU do not actually follow that line. They act more as enablers of the investment and enablers of the worst kind of practices that we have seen COSCO doing using in the port. So, for instance, the European Investment Bank, okay, so the national level, EU level investment bank has actually given 200 million to the Piraeus Port Authority to develop an environmentally completely disastrous, completely unsustainable project, which is the new container terminal. Okay, and then you had EU politicians saying, "Oh, why are they doing that?" And look, civil society. they're doing that because they have inherited 200 million from the PPA. That money was given before COSCO came in to do that project. And there is actually no kind of regulation, no kind of rethinking of what we are doing there. Now, but throughout the development of the investment, the European Union and the international creditors, so EU, European Bank, Central Bank, and the IMF, they pushed for rapid privatizations. The Piraeus port privatization was actually part also of the third bailout agreement. After the left party tried to stop these kind of memorandums and revert the financial crisis, they lost in the so-called negotiations that they had, and that led to a third bailout agreement with the provision of privatizing the port. Now, since 2017, we have again new instruments. The EU is very good at building instruments, right? Investment screening, a procurement screening mechanism, and also an anti-coercion mechanism. But all these are at they're not institutionalized enough. There's not enough coordination. Countries do not participate to the level that we would like them to do. And here we turn to the pockets of resistance, perhaps, and that's around civil society, a wonderful civil society in Piraeus that has resisted for a long time, not China, not COSCO, but the rapid neoliberal transformation of industrial relations, especially in the shipping industry. So this is actually one of their earlier protests against selling the port to COSCO. Now, the first deal of COSCO of 2009 actually created two different worlds when it comes to labor rights in the port. One that was very precarious in the part of the port that COSCO was controlling, with deep involvement of Greek subcontractors, human resources subcontractors, and so on, and that created a lot of tensions between COSCO and the dock workers in that port, in that part of the port. And the deal has been characterized as abysmal for labor rights because it brought casualization, it fragmented dock workers to different kind of groups. There were, of course, strikes, okay? And dock workers are traditionally very unionized. So there were quite a lot of strikes, and COSCO very quickly actually gave in. Now, it used to advertise the port as a strike-free port, but actually it had to, in order to keep that, it had to make quite a lot of concessions to the unions. Now, and this finding actually supports the main argument by people like Qingquan Li on how Chinese state capital actually, exactly because it has this very long-term perspective, it tries to optimize profit rather than to maximize it in the short term, is also more vulnerable to societal pressure. Now, and the Piraeus and the unions in Piraeus actually escape the confines of the port, because we're talking about the same people who work in the port, but they are also living near the port. They also send their children in local schools, and they're concerned about clean air, for instance. So the last group I'm going to be talking about is local businesses and communities. And local businesses and communities have also mobilized to stop some of COSCO's plans. First of all, there was this mobilization over the expansion of the cruise terminal, leading to litigation and construction halt of the expansion. So it was actually civil society that stopped one of COSCO's key projects in the port. Concerned, of course, because for environmental degradation and public health dangers that are associated with cruises. Okay, because cruise ships, they never turn off their engines. So they dock for 24 hours, 48 hours, and they keep polluting the place where they're located. Now, but also very interestingly, local businesses. They were in the beginning very supportive of COSCO, of course, because more jobs, more traffic of containers, but then they realized that COSCO was behaving quite monopolistically in different areas, in real estate. They had plans to create their own shipyards, and the Piraeus area has a booming, a very old shipyard industry. So there have been quite a lot of tensions, and we have had civil society groups like the Piraeus Bar Association or the different business associations actually coming out and saying to COSCO, no, enough is enough. We cannot accept this kind of new policies or new registries that they wanted to create for procurement and so on. Now, so we see, and of course, local communities that are very active at mobilizing and negotiating and applying pressure on COSCO to essentially local communities trying to substitute what the state should be doing, which is regulating better this type of investments. And I will conclude with the question of course, of influence. What kind of spillovers do we have? Well, the influence on Greece's international stance, international behavior is real, but I would argue is quite modest. Okay. Greece systematically refrains from criticizing China on human rights, maintains a rather phobic stance towards Taiwan. I see that across the board. But we don't have any strategic reorientation. Greece is a NATO country and one of those NATO countries that even Donald Trump likes because they pay above 2% of their budget to American weapons, right? So it's quite, I would say, behaving as it should be from a allied point of view. It has no security agreements with China, no major changes in alliance. But it is also true that the political and economic elite in the country remain very favorable towards Chinese investment. That's okay, but the biggest problem is that they don't really appreciate the risks involved. They don't understand, they don't bother to look at the deeper risks involved when you have so close relations with China. And we see that the PRC has expanded, especially in the last decade, its soft power efforts in media, culture, education. We have also seen efforts more recently to control the Chinese diaspora in Athens and also in other, primarily in Athens, but also we have sudden visits of public security officials going to different countries to talk with diaspora and to find ways to help them. And also the fact that there is absolutely no domestic knowledge production on China, no Chinese studies field, no scholars working on China. This has also resulted in a, I would say, quite naive kind of public discourse. No one really talks about the atrocities of the Chinese Communist Party towards the Uyghurs. No one really talks about why all the European countries are shutting down the Confucius Institute. But actually, Greece is possibly the only country, again with Hungary, that continues to open Confucius Institute. Right? So all these issues actually, they contribute to a very positive image in Greek public opinion that has been actually measured recently. Now, instead, we have real social rule of law, environmental challenges that receive little attention, and this is perhaps the impact on the fact that whatever kind of warnings come from the EU primarily so far, they have focused on more areas of hard security and not so much on those issues that people are way more directly relevant to the life of the people in Piraeus, in Athens, and Greece in general. Now, and I will conclude by reiterating some of the key takeaways. First of all, narratives that securitize or overly securitize, they actually miss the plot, a very rich plot. COSCO's investment is heavily shaped by local actors and by regional actors, and we need an approach to examine this reality of the embedded phenomenon of investment in Piraeus. Now, a local agency, of course, drives Chinese investment, but also, as we have seen in the case of civil society, it also demands better regulation. And this is crucial because this is where, in the end of the day, responsibility lies. The responsibility for managing Chinese investment needs to be attributed to host states and EU institutions in that European context, not so much to what COSCO is doing deliberately or not. It's all about responsibility of the host state. So, and of course, we need a broader recalibration of EU tools and building a local capacity necessary to address those challenges, because this is the kind of the agenda that matters the most to local societies. That's all from me. Thank you.
Great. So to remind people online, I have one question already from Isaac Carden, and other people can put their questions in there. So Kostas, thank you. That was really informative and, as you say, nuanced and excellent. So when you say that the securitization narrative misses the point, what then could you say, what do you think are, quote unquote, China's goals, if that concept even makes any sense at all? Maybe we shouldn't be speaking of China's goals, but simply, so I suppose a minimum, you made the point that COSCO's the first deal in Piraeus, which was the container. And by the way, maybe you could say a little bit more about that. Do they own, do they rent, do they lease? What exactly do they have in the two deals? Because then the next one is the Port Authority. So what is it when you have the Port Authority? What is it that you have? Okay. So the question is, you said it was triggered by operational needs. And so if you could explain, what does that mean? So the minimum story might be that COSCO needs some place to, park their containers. And so they rent access, and it's like, it's nothing there, right? Not a big deal. And the PLA, you said for the PLA Navy to come in, that's ridiculous. Can you explain why that's so ridiculous?
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that ridiculous. So there's a low story that says they just needed a little place for a couple containers, and it's just economic and it's nothing. And then there's a high-end thing. This comes from Xi Jinping himself. He wakes up at midnight. He's like, I got control over all of, sort of the Eastern Mediterranean, so where are we on that scale of how scary it is?
Good, yeah, that's a good question. So with operational need, I do not refer simply to container storage, but what COSCO was looking for is, after its collapse of the Naples agreement, a good transshipment hub. A transshipment hub that will minimize the time a container, the major tankers that bring the different kind of goods and to European markets. So there was quite a lot of economic planning behind that. That's, we remind that this whole discussion took place long before the BRI became a thing, long before Xi Jinping, as far as we know now, it was decided that it will be Xi Jinping, that the next person is going to be leading the Chinese Communist Party. So a long time before that, of course, economic activities, economic presence also carry political influence. There is no question to that. So I see a plot where we have a Chinese SOE driving its presence in the Mediterranean, taking the opportunity to trade a very badly, an investment that went bad with an investment that's more promising in a way more secure environment, where it has local allies, where it has a government that's very much willing to welcome it there. But then when, of course, Xi Jinping took power, everything in a way assumed a more clear strategic orientation. Why would COSCO be interested in controlling the entire port? Definitely because Piraeus is such an important gate to, they want a gate that is not for its goods, for Chinese goods in Europe, that it's not kind of dependent politically too much on a country that has tensions with China. But of course, they're trying to find more friendly ports. And this comes as part of course, a business and economic strategy to gain all those kind of access points in Europe. That's why we see the different investments of COSCO in different European ports, but always in kind of minority percentages, always like in small subcontracting deals, rather than this major port authority privatization. Now, the first deal in 2009 was essentially a concession agreement leasing the piers, the container piers, for a few decades, and that gave them quite a lot of, they gave them full control in a certain small part of the port. They could also dictate what was happening with container piers elsewhere in the port. So basically, the Greek government had said that we're not going to develop any other container facilities. You take the whole pie of the container business. And then, of course, in 2016, they come and they privatize the entire kind of port. Now, the reason why I don't really buy the more hard security aspect of threat is that Piraeus, first of all, Greece is a NATO ally. Okay, its main military port is very close to Piraeus, just actually opposite. And I don't see any scenario in which Piraeus could sustain any sort of military activity by the PLA in the long run.
As long as NATO didn't agree to it.
Exactly. I don't see any kind of, and Greece, because of its own security problems with Turkey and so on, would definitely never trade its the support of its European and American allies for a port deal with China. So I think that the security threat is the hard security dimension, I think, is clearly over exaggerated in that case.
So we have online, we have Isaac Cardin. Isaac, you're still at the U.S. Naval War College, right? We don't, people can't talk to us, right? You can't talk to us, but Isaac, is at the U.S. Naval War College, and he recently published an important book on China's interpretation of the law of the sea. So Isaac, I don't know if you have any comment on what Kostas just said, but Isaac says to us, I'll read it in reverse, Isaac, because with respect to the PLA Navy access, he says they do call regularly at Piraeus, including at least one technical stop, Jishu Tenkao, in 2019, meaning more significant ship maintenance and repair than a simple port call. This doesn't mean it's a base, far from it, but it's also not nothing from naval operational standpoint, which I guess you probably could accept. I mean, yeah, they can repair their ship. They're not forbidden from access to the Mediterranean.
And the Piraeus port has hosted in the past also Russian warships, so from different parts of the world. So I don't necessarily see that as a problem.
Yeah. And then Isaac asks, I wonder if you think COSCO's positions elsewhere in Europe, e.g. Germany, Spain, Netherlands, create a different kind of influence, not just in Greece.
But at European level.
So Isaac, sorry, Isaac. Yeah, he says, sorry, can't talk except through this Q&A. Yeah, because we're set up in the webcast mode. But he says, I'm at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in DC, which you told me, Isaac, but I forgot. Okay, so back to his question. Whether COSCO's positions elsewhere in Europe, Germany, Spain, Netherlands, create a different kind of influence, not just on Greece, but on trade flows and maybe political and security decisions across the Mediterranean and Europe. Yeah, so if they have multiple bases, and then his second question, which he asked before I started talking, is sort of converges with one that I asked. To what extent does COSCO stand in for China and its overall interests in Greece? To what extent is negotiating with COSCO effectively negotiating with Beijing?
Very good questions. Thank you. So about the multiple ports, again, we need to, I think, look at each of those deals very carefully, because it's very easy to say, okay, so, COSCO is everywhere in all ports, in all those ports in Europe, but actually, with the exception of Greece, in all other ports has minority shares. It has those kind of concession deals that subcontracting essentially certain activities to COSCO. It doesn't control the entire port authority as we have in Athens. So clearly there is an economic logic. Clearly the trade flows are very important. Creating all this network of where goods are being transshipped and then moved to the different European markets from different points. Yes, absolutely, that's true, and it does create possibly concerns about competition, let's say, in the European context. And again, if Isaac has any specific kind of examples of this being translated into political influence, I would really love to have a discussion with him about that. Now, when it comes to does the Greek government negotiate with COSCO or with the Chinese government? That's actually a very good question, because I think it's a mistake if we simply treat Chinese SOEs as the tentacles of the communist octopus. They also have, they also seek profitability. They also seek, there is a business perspective in that. So, but again, we also see, for instance, that in the case of COSCO, whenever there is a problem with a strike or any other kind of major operational problem in COSCO, the Chinese embassy contacting the Greek government and trying to solve the problem. Whatever the problem that can be. Okay, so it's a kind of a, in the past, I think in the past it began at least as a business-led with diplomatic support kind of format. The question is whether this is going to continue, or where we're getting to a stage where the state will be leading the business decisions rather than supporting the business decisions. Okay.
I mean, I guess the U.S. embassy gets involved in the same way when U.S. But as you said, it's the embassy serving the enterprise rather than vice versa.
Yeah. Of course, COSCO is is also paying back politically to the embassy because it is a soft power tool in many different ways. So there is definitely collaboration between those two. And one of the things that I'm looking at and I'm more interested about is whether we also have within the SOEs a more clear presence of the Chinese Communist Party. So we have more mobilization of SOEs internally. And this is I think the $1 million question here.
So a lot of the narrative about this is built on the case of the Hambon Tota port in Sri Lanka. But it sounds like this deal is very different. So in that case, the Sri Lankan government borrows money from China to create a port. In this case, you have a port. In the Sri Lanka case, the government can't pay back the loan. So China becomes, not quite sure what China becomes, but a 99-year irrevocable leasehold or something like that. In the Piraeus case, Greece didn't borrow money.
No.
COSCO is paying Greece. So that am I right? So that's
Exactly.
the contrast.
It's more like a FDI. It's clear investments, not like a loan.
But then, okay, so that's encouraging, but now let me get anxious and say, okay, COSCO has achieved, how long of a lease do they have over the PAA?
2050, I think they have like another 32 years or something.
So during that time, how much power do they have? Supposing they said, Costas says, you guys will never allow us to bring Navy here because we have NATO other side of the bay, but we're going to bring our Navy here. We have the right. It's in the contract. Can they do that?
No, they don't have the right in the contract to do
What's
that.
in the contract?
It's nothing about military kind of use that they can simply, decide and implement.
So the contract says all you can do is simply to do commercial traffic and and we have a right to inspect what you're doing and to veto what you do.
In order for the thing is, in order for Chinese military vessels to dock in Piraeus, the Ministry of Defense is involved. Is a different kind of ministry involved in those kind of decisions. It's not simply the Piraeus Port Authority that will grant access, that can grant access like that.
Great. Isaac has another thing here. He says, if there's time, one recent case to look at political leverage for China via instrument of COSCO is the minority stake in a terminal at Hamburg that COSCO or China muscled through over heavy German and European and American opposition. I wish, Isaac, you were here for this whole dialogue, but that's very useful.
Yeah, I think that the major problem when it comes to this type of deals is what does it mean about China's influence vis-a-vis the economic elites in certain sectors and how powerful those elites are politically. Right? So we've seen, I mean, when everything is said and done about Chinese investment in Europe and all the threats associated with it, if you want to raise awareness and make things more secure, you need to turn to German industrialists because it's them who have the most to gain from the economic connection with China. Right? So I think the elite dimension is very important here.
Great. People in the room who would like to raise any questions? Sabine?
Yeah, thank you very much for your interesting talk. I was wondering about it. I'm assuming there are more ports in Greece, and whether there are similar discussions about all the other ports that there are, or if this is just like a single instance in Piraeus is because of all the reasons that you detailed a very special case. So I was wondering about the broader picture.
Well, indirectly, there is some Chinese investment in the port of Thessaloniki, but indirectly it's part of a consortium that owns part of the port. Nothing else. All the other ports, I mean, there is clearly the Greek government, very rightfully so, wishes to privatize more of the infrastructure, because if Greece is going to survive economically in the long run, they simply have to do that. So they are seeking to privatize ports. I think we have Italian investment, we have US interest in, especially the port of Alexandroupolis, which is up north, and also the creation of a military kind of facilities there from the US. But yeah, Chinese involvement in other ports now.
Thank you. I have a question about the Chinese diaspora you were mentioning there, and sort of who makes that up? Are they students? Are they workers? And how integrated they are into Greek society? And what the government, you said, was trying to control about their behavior?
Well, I do not have research on that yet. I have an excellent PhD student who is working on diaspora. What we see is, so first of all, it's not students. There are very few, very little numbers of Chinese students in Greece. It's mainly working people who came to set up, their businesses, like the traditional model of Chinese diaspora, okay, that was taking place 50 years ago elsewhere in Europe. Now, they keep very low profile in general, but what I have noticed lately is, first of all, that there used to be a small newspaper that now it parrots the official line more evidently. We have had a few visits from Chinese police, supposedly going to different cities, trying to link with the Chinese diaspora, offering all sorts of services, for the IDs and things like that, but also establishing links.
To the Greek government, and it's permitted.
Yes, we also had these issues with the secret police department, but I believe that those have now been removed. They don't really exist. But and another thing that I found out about is that the Chinese mission in Athens has increased considerably. They have something like 50 people there. So, and of course, diaspora issues are a big part of it. And also in 2022, in August, when Pelosi was visiting Taiwan, it was the first time when we had a Chinese demonstration in Athens, outside the US Embassy, which is very centrally located. So that was, I think, the first show of force of this new kind of mechanism for mobilizing diaspora.
Are there other big Chinese investments in Greece besides this one?
Yeah, we have State Grid that invested in the power transmission company in Greece. Again, a minority share, but of course, we're talking here about critical infrastructure, so that's quite important. That's, I think, major, and a lot in real estate, and this has to do, of course, with the golden visa scheme that Greece has been using and putting lots of opportunities for that.
Those are private homes, you mean?
So private homes, but also bigger kind of developments.
Yes.
Hi, I have questions. You said that this golden age from 2015 to 19, and beside the Greek people was cautious about Chinese plan. What other reason? Is there anything to do with this COVID pandemic and the Chinese economic downturns that influence Chinese influence on the Greek?
Well, I wouldn't say that that the golden era is exactly over. as that the Greek government is slowly waking up to the reality that we need to be more cautious about what we're doing, what we're not doing with the Chinese side. But especially during that period, 2015, 2019, we had essentially the Greek government being way too supportive, unnecessarily supportive to whatever sensitivities the Chinese embassy was expressing, and I fear even not expressing. So trying to preempt any negative reaction on their side. So trying to play safe like that. And in some areas, unfortunately, this continues. So we had recently a case where the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued this warning, urgent document, urgent directions to the entire public sector in Greece, saying, do not participate in the Taiwan National Day celebration of the local Taipei representative office. And this went to all the ministries, and the directions included not just officials, and I understand officials, and this was happening also in the past, but now it included all state employees. So and it was interesting that the same kind of document was even saying, do not even respond to that. You don't need to even RSVP. Actually, you don't need to. You shouldn't RSVP. So that's not only impolite, but it's also completely unnecessary. In sense, a very wrong message. And I think overall, that's the problem with of Greece, that it has treated the Chinese embassy and overall the PRC in a way that when it tries to recalibrate that, they will feel offended because they were taking Greece for granted in so many areas.
So how does the US embassy behave during this period of time? Are they coming around warning you not to do this, or do they just hang back? And how effective have they been?
Well, I guess you need to ask them. I think I think not that clearly not that effective, right? Because otherwise we wouldn't be having so many kind of instances, but increasingly concerned. Now the problem, and I say that also in relation to different countries, is that when you have a key player like China that can mobilize state capital to get things done, and you cannot do that. You know, every time I talk to foreign diplomats about the Piraeus investment or about investment in China's in Greece's railway system, that actually Greece needs a lot of that investment, and only China has offered to do that. Say, okay, where are your companies? Okay, if COSCO doesn't run the port, who is going to run the port? Can we have a Japanese company run? If your companies cannot run the railway system, then are you going to be surprised if a Chinese company actually comes and runs the railway system? You know, I think that's a very big issue that the EU needs to deal with very seriously, and realize that in critical infrastructure areas, you need to provide alternatives to host states.
But this gets back to the thing of the thing. We need nuance, as you said. But now you're saying China has state investment. But before, when I said, are you dealing with Xi Jinping's strategy to control Europe or just the need to move containers? You said it's just container. It's not about. But now you're saying, oh, no, this is Chinese state investment. So what's the nuance in between these positions?
We need to look at each deal differently, case by case. We need to understand whether we have a coherent kind of approach and story. We need to look at how the Chinese interests on these specific projects develop. So, for instance, in the case of the railway, we have the Chinese ambassador over many years now, repeatedly referring to the railway system. So we know that the state is directly interested in that,
Chinese state.
the Chinese state. So we know, and so we know that there is a clear political decision to go for that no matter what. And now why? We can speculate, but I think it's important to see how the Chinese interest to invest in every single project actually develops, to get a better idea of this broader or strategic thinking, whether it's concrete, whether it's more like an umbrella, and then you have SOEs pitching their ideas and pursuing their own project, whether there is more clear and direct involvement in the state in designing those projects.
Very tricky. What is the influence? So Greece's immediate neighbors are Albania,
North Macedonia,
North Macedonia, Bulgaria.
Bulgaria.
That's it, 3.
Yep, and of course Turkey, which is
But Turkey is maritime.
also land.
There is a
Also,
land border.
There's a land border. as well.
Okay, so, and none of those, correct me if I'm wrong, none of those countries speaks Greek or has Greek like, culture, etc. They sort of have, what do we say?
I mean,
So my question is, what is the influence of Greece in that region? Is it
well, yeah.
simply Greece is a transport corridor for the containers to go up into the Balkans, or is there political, cultural, etc. Greek investment? What's the relationship?
Oh, that's a very complex question. Now, as far as I know, I mean, Greece, at present, there is a Greek kind of minority in Albania, and there are various bilateral political issues with Albania on that. I think that Greece's role in the region, of course, being the recipient of major Chinese investment, is an example, is a case study. Everyone is interested in how this is developing.
Yeah.
But we have also seen collaboration between Chinese companies and Greek companies, for instance, in constructing new roads in North Macedonia. So there is collaboration there, definitely. And now, when it comes to political influence, Greece has tried to maintain the best possible relations with its Balkan neighbors, of course, because it's in the vicinity, but relations are often tricky because in the Balkans, we still have all those lingering nationalisms and all those weird and distorted memories of living with each other under the Ottoman Empire. So there's quite a lot of history there. But if your question is, where does Greece fit in the broader picture of Chinese kind of influence in the Balkans? There was this idea of a corridor. So because you bring all the containers in Piraeus, and what's happening now basically that Piraeus is a transshipment hub, right? So big vessels come in, they move the containers in smaller ships, and they move them in different ports in the region. There was this idea of developing the railway system, developing the roads more, and creating a corridor, so improving infrastructural connectivity. But that is not going that well. There's been quite a lot of discussion about that, but for different reasons, the different kind of pieces of the puzzle don't really match.
So we're basically talking about manufactured products from China, come around, they go to Piraeus, get offloaded, put onto smaller ships, and going then cheaply, I would think, to Germany, France?
Central and Eastern Europe, absolutely.
So Naples would have been much closer.
I think that no, because they prefer having the load on those smaller vessels. So they come on the
so it doesn't
the bigger
matter,
container
Naples,
ships.
Piraeus, any place is
Yeah,
more or less
but
the
actually,
same.
Piraeus really makes sense for an operation like this because of the distance from the Suez Canal and all those deeply geopolitical, geoeconomic aspects.
So I got the idea from you that are there two main political parties in Greece or more than two?
Okay, I mean, now in Greece, we're in a position where there is actually one main political party and then a few smaller parties that fight with each other. So
Which
that's
one is
quite-
the main one?
So that's the conservative, the ruling party, New Democracy. Then we have a socialist party, a left party, that they are around 10 to 15% in the polls right now, and lots of crazy small parties.
And the impression I got was that China is not an issue that distinguishes one party from another.
No, I think it's only the Communist Party of Greece that has been opposing the investment since day one. Everyone else,
On behalf of the workers,
on behalf of the workers, on behalf of it's a very ideological party as well. So,
but then China's communist, so
yeah,
why aren't they pro?
exactly.
So what's the ideological difference between Beijing and the Greek Communist Party?
Huge. I don't think that the Greek Communist Party considers the Chinese Communist Party very rightfully so as a communist, right?
So the Greeks are more to the left.
They're more to the
They're
left, more to the.
Trotskyites, they're
I think even worse, like Stalinists.
Oh, yeah. Chinese Communist Party is Stalinist. Yes, sir, yes.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. I was quite surprised there, like a political and economic elite in Greece are very favorable to China's investment. And I'd like to expand our discussion more broadly into the Europe, actually. As you know, China's investment in Europe increased dramatically since 2000. And I think it was the peak in 2016 and 17. China was the #1 investor in Europe. But the European Union especially has concerned on the patterns of China's investment in Europe, such as like the M&A types of investments, especially conducted by state-owned enterprise. The COSCO was the telling example, actually. So, as you know, the EU has introduced the FDI screening system, which came into force, I think it was 2020. And I'm not quite sure that Piraeus port case was kind of has impact on the EU's introduction of the FDI screening system, but is there any change after the introduction of the screening system in Greece that like China's investment patterns or policy?
Well, when it comes, the investment mechanism is an institution, right? So I think that what we have, I can say that yes, we saw some change in terms of the 5G hardware from Huawei, right? But this was not the result of investment screening. This was the result of American pressure, right, to be very clear. So actually, Greece is one of the countries that they're dragging their feet when it comes to implementing the investment screening mechanism, which by design is not robust enough. There's way too much of a voluntary component in it. Institutionally, it's not strong. You know, it doesn't have like we don't have like a proper corpus of FDI investors. FDI investigations taking place centrally. It's more about different countries implementing the same kind of rules and exchanging information. That's the FDI screening mechanism in the EU. It's not robust enough. And that's why you have countries that actually are quite forward in implementing the idea of investment screening quite well, like Austria. And then you have countries like Greece that actually doesn't bother anyone. It doesn't happen. Simple as that. It's all back. It's not an institutional issue. It's still a political issue. If there is going to be an investment screening like this.
There was actually a question about Hamburg recent case. I think it was signed June this year. It just like COSCO can have like less than 25% of its share in Hamburg port. But still it is one of the main terminal in Hamburg. But I can't really understand that Germany can approve the China's investment in the infrastructure actually, because Germany was the leading country to introduce the FTI screening system in the EU.
I would say that I'm not too familiar with the specific case, but I would say that investment screening means screening investment, not blocking investment, right? So the fact that you have investment screening in place doesn't mean that investment is not going to happen. I just hope that in that particular case, all the proper risk assessments were taking place. Perhaps Sabina has more to say about that. Yeah.
So does anybody else have any questions? Daniel.
It's a little bit more far afield other than just ports, but I'm curious how other European countries are maybe learning or not learning, as the case may be, from how Vilnius is approaching China relations these days. Vilnius.
Yeah. Well, definitely we had a good development with the anti-coercion mechanism, which was, I think, ratified like last week or so. So we need to see that in practice. I think if the anti-coercion mechanism actually works, this means that we have something, that concrete that came out of all this. But I don't think that, for instance, in Greece, this has any kind of impact or influence. Unfortunately not. And I would expect to see, and I hope that there will be a more common stance, especially on Taiwan, because you get very different kind of approaches with this recent celebration of the Shuangshi anniversary, the Double 10 anniversary, which is considered the national day in Taiwan. You saw very different reactions. So you had countries where ministers and members of parliament would attend the gala, and you had countries like Greece that were saying, no one goes there, and don't even RSVP. So I hope that there can be a bit more coordination on that front, because we need Taiwan, right? For many, if not for running, the whole defense of democracy kind of idea, we need Taiwan from microchips in the end of the day, right? It's not a country that we can ignore. Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions.